So I use those quite a bit. I don't typically use much multi-band compression on vocals. Just if it's like really needs a lot of work, that's usually when I kind of go into multi-band compression. But for the most part, the compressor in the 1176 or the compressor in the 9000J SSL channel strip usually is most of the compression that I'll do. Sometimes some parallel stuff as well. I've been experimenting a lot with like doing some parallel stuff for like the top end sheen of like pop vocals. I have some techniques that I like to use with like Aphex, or with using like this technique where you use like a high pass at around 5K and a limiter, and you can kind of, and then you flip the polarity, and you can kind of blend that in and get this just real airy kind of top end sheen. So I'll do some stuff like that if I want like really silky, crisp high end. As for effects, I mean, it could be many different things. I love the Arturia has a plate reverb that I really like, even better than the Universal Audio EMT 140.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a plate I like to use. I'll probably find myself using that on vocals more than any other reverb. I really like the Slate Verb Suite Classics. I like that. It's got like I've got all the Brecasty stuff. I sometimes will mess with something like that. The Pro R with Fab Filter? I really like that reverb for more what I would call like a synthetic kind of verb. And then, yeah, lots of delays, Sound Toy stuff. I've got like in my template, I've got like delay throw tracks or channels ready to go, so I can send stuff there just to allow me to be really creative from the get-go when I'm automating things. So that's just a few things that come to mind when it comes to like a lead vocal. Nothing too fancy. Just for me, it's more about a couple of things that sound and work really well. So, and I love channel strips just because there's so much that you can do inside of one channel strip. It just keeps things nice and clean. And yeah. So
you said you used to overprocess it. What did you find was happening when you were overprocessing it? And like, what were you doing that was
like
too much?
Too much EQ. Like, oh, here's like a couple of bands in the Cubase channel strip doing some EQ, and then there's like two other EQs, like cutting out a bunch of stuff here and there, and just a lot of subtractive stuff that really started to make the vocal feel small and kind of thin. Especially in like in the low mids. And so I found that usually when you capture something, that's like roughly what it kind of needs to sound like in the mix. You don't need to like get crazy and put on all this makeup, because then it's just not even it's going to be something completely different. You kind of just have to embrace what it is and enhance it a little bit. And that usually ends up being the best way to go. I used to think that I could, make something completely different that it's not. And it never worked out. It always just kind of sucked the life out of it. And so, yeah. For me, it's less is more, I guess.
Yeah, that's a lesson I need to learn. I feel like, the problem with with being a producer or a mixer is that you can hear all these issues, and so you want to fix like every issue.
Yep.
And then you hear like a little bit of harshness at like 5K. Let me just try to get rid of that. Let me just get a little narrow band in the Pro Q. Maybe even do it dynamically. And sometimes it's too much, and you got to just know when to stop.
Yep.
And I think I struggle with that a little bit. I think I've gotten better, and also I feel like the Pro Q3 is so transparent compared to like some other EQs. Like when I used to go crazy with like let's say Logic's stock EQ, you would hear those artifacts like right away. But the Pro Q3, I feel like I could do almost anything, and it still sounds like good. But if you take out too much, it really does start to get anemic, and like you said, in the low mids especially, you don't want to mess with that too much or do too many bands there.
One thing that I try to really do these days that I used to be bad about, I try to be way less visual, and I try to not do nearly as much EQing while in solo. I used to do too much of both of those things, and just by like being less visual and less EQing while in solo, like you don't actually mess with things as much if you do those two things. You just kind of leave them alone, and they usually end up sounding like a vocal or a violin. You kind of have to embrace some of those gnarly things that come through, because that's what makes it what it is.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. Yeah, and it's something I was talking about also recently with guest Nina, who was on the show, and we were talking about like when you get too perfect, then you kind of take away the character or the vibe
For sure.
of the record, and it's hard. I was saying it's hard not to do that because that's what we've been trained to do, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm like, I can do anything to any piece of audio, whatever. I can make it what I want, and you can't. You just sometimes
you gotta let the magic be magic.
Step aside and just leave it as is.
But on the other side of that equation, I recently spoke with Dr. Ford, who's also in Nashville.
Good
and
episode. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and thank you. And he's I just gotta let him rant, but it was like, he goes to town with like the mid range and like using plugins like Soothe and then as they get anemic, he starts to push some saturation into those areas to kind of give it a bit more juice, so to speak.
Yeah,
and so like there's a lot of ways. I feel like you gotta just be judicious about when you're getting to that kind of a vocal, or if you're, maybe because you're like when you're recording vocals in your studio and it sounds amazing, like. You really don't need to do that much, but if you're getting like one of those like the Focusrite sound kind of MXL mic or whatever, I shouldn't throw people under the bus, but you know what I'm talking about, the $100 mic into the $100 interface. That's when a lot of those issues arise.
For sure, yeah. And I'll still use Soothe some, and when it's necessary, Decapitator. I like that on a vocal, just a little bit of that. If it just does feel like you said anemic, but typically, it doesn't take if it's recorded well and it's a good singer. You don't need a lot of stuff. I'm definitely become more and more of a minimalist as
minimalism is the way
down the path. Yeah, for sure. It's less tools, but really good ones is kind of where I'm at right now.
I love that. Yeah, you gotta like experiment and learn all the tools and like learn how far you can push things, and then you realize like. I just shared this like stupid meme on Instagram today that was like. Everyone responded that I shared it, and I didn't make it up. I just found it. Okay, so it's like the one with like the brain that becomes more like more knowledgeable and then it explodes or whatever. And so it's like it starts with like turning the knobs until it sounds good, copying signal chains and mix templates from famous producers as it gets like more knowledgeable, carefully studying attack, release, threshold, decay time, side shading, saturation, gate staging, EQ, like about to explode, and then it ends up with like just turning the knobs until it sounds good. So like in the end, you learn all this stuff, and it just goes back to the simplicity of just like. What sounds good?
Yeah, I mean, give me some good monitors and a good room with 10 plugins, or let me only pick 10 plugins, and I feel like I could do really good work. You don't really need a collection of 150 different plugins to make great sounding records.
Yeah, the future engineer is going to be just like a really nice screen and 2 monitors and or maybe I don't know. We don't have to get into Atmos, but like or really good headphones and. And just like a really well treated room and done. Like that's what it's about.
Yep.
I'm definitely feeling that as well. And you mentioned speaking of like vocals that sound so good just coming in and how they were meant to be captured. Do you have like what are you doing in terms of like capturing vocals in your studio?
Yeah, I mean, so most of the vocals that I do cut, or that I cut all the vocals on every record I produce, but I do most of them here, which is more of a big mix room. The room's about 24 by 24, I think. But it's real nice and tight because I have so much acoustic treatment in here, and I don't have a booth or anything like that. We just do it in the room, which I kind of like. It's just really easy to communicate. It feels real natural. And so, we're both on headphones. I'm sitting here facing the screen, and they're just to my left, and we can kind of see each other as they're singing. And my favorite mic, the mic that I've had for a long time, is the Mojave MA200, which is a kind of a U67 clone, and I've always liked that U67, just real kind of bright and airy sound. And so it's been a mic I've probably had for 10 years or something, and I'll cut most vocals with that. I've got some other stuff that if it's just not working, I'll try, but that usually is the sound that I'm looking for. It's just got this real open, clear, it's just a great foundation to start with for most people. And I have the SM7 and all that kind of stuff. I've just never been a fan of SM7 vocals, or most of the time it's not really my thing. I love SM7s on other things like hi-hats and tambourines, and that's like my favorite, mic for those applications. But for vocals, I mean, if you're maybe doing like a rock vocal or something, it might work well. But
right,
usually,
heavy vocals.
Yeah,
the one that's going to air before the episode that's going to air before yours is a heavy vocalist.
Okay,
and he uses almost always the SM7B, to like do vocals. So it's like to each whatever genre you're doing,
Yeah,
like or the style or how dense the track is. Sometimes you just need a dynamic mic to cut through a dense track. Like
sure.
there's something to be said about that. Like you don't need all the extra fluff. Just give me what I give me the basic.
Yeah.
It's somebody once explained to me what he thought of. I like for half a second applied to audio school and I didn't end up going. And the guy was telling me he thinks about the difference between a dynamic mic and a condenser mic. Whereas a condenser mic is like the statue has to be carved out of the marble, and then the dynamic mic is like a statue that's already been like pre-carved out for you.
Oh, okay.
So you just have like less information.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
but it is what it is.
Yeah, it's like it's just the bare bones information or something. Whereas a condenser mic is like all the little detail. It's like the difference
Total
between
broadband.
Difference between whatever 1080 and 4K or something. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but yeah, it's you're getting it's more, I guess, more full spectrum for sure than you'd get from a dynamic mic. But I love dynamic mics for a lot of applications too. I mean, when it comes to guitar cabs or something like that, it's SM57 every time. So
57 does always work on guitar cabs. That's for sure. I prefer the RE20 over the SM7, but it's such a personal thing. Like I think it has like. It's a bit more high fidelity than the SM7. Like it's got a bit more like a nicer top end. Yeah. And just feels more, I don't know, more condensery as a dynamic mic than the SM7. But that's just me.
Yeah. No. If I'm cutting vocals with a dynamic, I would prefer RE20 over SM7 for sure. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Oh, so in terms of like monitoring, what is your monitoring situation these days like?
Yeah, that's something that I'm constantly trying to improve. I mean, I'm trying to make every aspect. I'm trying to get an extra couple percent here and there in everything. But with monitoring, it started early on with like the Yamaha stuff. I had the NS10s and then the HS80s, which were before the HS8s.
Those are the monitors I sold less than a year ago.
Yeah. So I spent many years with those, and then sold those probably, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, I want to say, and got the small Neumann. They're called KH120s. They're like, I think they're maybe like $1,200 or $1,400 a pair. So they're pricey for their size, but they're really, really well built monitors. Super flat and detailed. I think it's like a 5 1/4 inch woofer. So it doesn't look very large in a big room. It kind of looks funny, but I worked on those for many, many years, and really was happy with them. I felt like I wanted a little bit more information in the mid range, and I was ready to like take the next step in monitoring and spend a little bit more money, especially the more and more mix work came in. It's like, okay, I want really, really, really good monitoring in this room now. And so I guess probably 6 months ago or so upgraded to the next step up, the Neumann, the KH310s, which are their 3-way monitor. So it's got the 8-inch woofer, the mid-range driver, and then the tweeter. And I think it might be the same tweeter that was even in the KH120. So it was a very, very smooth transition, just staying with the same manufacturer and just going to like the next step up. But it's been a great move for me. I think with a room of this size, it's nice to have a speaker of that size. It's a sealed cabinet, so it's just like the bottom end is real tight. Yeah. So I really am loving that. And then having that mid-range driver really like helps, because mid-range, as we know, is everything.
It's interesting that you said that the mid-range got improved as opposed to the low end, because I would imagine you got a bit more low end out of those monitors than the previous ones.
That's true, because these go down to I think 34 hertz, and then I think the
mastering engineers use them. I mean,
the 120s I think went down to 50 something.
Not bad.
For their size, it was impressive. And then I use a sub as well, just not a lot, just slightly blended in there, and then a little bit of tuning as well. But it doesn't take much because the room's pretty good, and then the monitors are like some of the flattest out there. on the market. So
I've never actually used them, but based on like the mixers that I've interviewed that do use them, it seems like people are getting good mixes out of them. So
yeah, I mean, it's a pretty sweet spot for like price and quality. I mean, you could. I know the kind of the other one is the ATC. Was it like SCM 25s or something like that? Whatever the 25s, they're 3-way. I think it's probably another $3,000 more or something for the pair. And I have friends who have those and really